It was Chile's National Day. The streets were filled with music, fireworks, and celebration. And while an entire country looked up at the sky, 16 men walked into a fortified building in Santiago and calmly loaded $21 million into their vehicles. Nobody heard a thing. Nobody stopped them. And for 3 years, nobody even knew who they were. September 18th is the most sacred date in the Chilean calendar. Independence Day. Every year the country shuts down for 2 days of national celebration. Barbecues, folk music, dancing. The police are stretched thin covering public events. Security companies reduce their overnight staff. It was the perfect night for the most audacious robbery in Chilean history. Stories like this one exist across every country in South America. Cases buried in archives, crimes nobody outside the region ever heard about, legends that locals whisper but history books ignore. If that's the kind of story you've been looking for, you just found your channel. Subscribe to Southern Legends and hit the notification bell. We drop a new story every week. The target was Esertval, a cash transport company located on Domingo Santa Maria Street in the Independencia district of Santiago. Esertval was responsible for moving currency reserves across the Chilean capital. On any given night the vaults inside held hundreds of millions of pesos awaiting distribution to banks the following morning. The planning had begun months earlier. The group that would carry out the robbery was not a collection of street criminals. They were organized, methodical, and had inside knowledge of how the company operated. At least 3 members of the crew were either current or former security employees at Esertval itself. Having insiders was everything. They knew the shift rotations. They knew which cameras covered which angles. They knew that on national holiday weekends the overnight supervisor typically reduced the internal patrol schedule to allow guards to participate in the celebrations outside. Human nature had created a window that no amount of technology could close. The operation was scheduled for the night of September 18th into the early hours of September 19th, 2017. The date was not chosen randomly. It was the precise moment when institutional attention across the entire country would be at its lowest point in the entire calendar year. At approximately 11:30 p.m. one of the guards on duty stepped outside the perimeter without his service weapon to buy cigarettes from a nearby kiosk. It was a small breach of protocol. The kind of thing that happens on slow nights, on holidays, when everything feels calm and nothing seems to be at risk. He never made it back inside on his own terms. When the guard turned around, the crew was already there. Armed with military-grade rifles, wearing masks, moving in complete silence. Within seconds he was restrained. The outer door was opened. And the clock started. Inside the building there were 6 other employees on duty. The crew neutralized each one methodically, moving through the corridors with a precision that suggested they had rehearsed this exact sequence many times. Not a single shot was fired. Not a single alarm was triggered from inside the building. The vault contained 15.8 billion Chilean pesos. At the September 2017 exchange rate, that translated to approximately 21 million US dollars. The cash had been consolidated in preparation for distribution on the morning of September 20th, the first business day after the holiday. The timing of the robbery had been calibrated to the exact moment of maximum accumulation. Loading took less than 40 minutes. The crew worked in organized pairs. Each bag was filled, sealed, and handed off to a relay team waiting at the service entrance. The operation resembled a military extraction more than a conventional robbery. Every movement had a purpose. Every second had been accounted for. By 1:15 a.m. the vehicles were moving through the empty streets of Santiago. The city was either asleep or still celebrating. The crew split into multiple smaller groups, each taking a different route, each vehicle carrying only a portion of the total haul. Even if one vehicle was stopped, the others would reach their destinations. The 7 employees left behind were secured but unharmed. Their phones had been confiscated. The external communication lines had been disabled. The crew had calculated that it would take between 45 minutes and an hour before anyone on the outside would realize something was wrong. If this story has you hooked, there are dozens more waiting for you on this channel. The 1994 Valledupar Bank Heist. The Legend of El Silban. The Unsolved Mysteries of the Atacama. Subscribe to Southern Legends, hit the bell, and never miss another untold story from South America. A police patrol passed the building at 1:40 a.m. as part of a routine circuit. Nothing appeared unusual from the outside. The lights were off in the areas visible from the street. There was no sign of forced entry at the main entrance. They continued on without stopping. The first indication that something was wrong came at 2:20 a.m. when a family member of one of the guards tried to reach him by phone to wish him a happy Independence Day and received no answer. She tried 3 more times. Nothing. She called the company's general line. No response. At 2:47 a.m. she called the police. When officers arrived, they found the main entrance undisturbed but the internal security line unanswered. They made contact with a supervisor who authorized entry. What they found inside took several minutes to fully process. 7 employees restrained and unharmed. The vaults completely empty. And an absence of evidence so complete it bordered on impossible. The forensic team that processed the scene over the following days found almost nothing usable. No fingerprints on the vault surfaces. No DNA on the zip ties used to restrain the employees. Shell casings from weapons that could not be traced. Tire tracks that matched vehicle types sold in the hundreds of thousands across Chile. The investigation that followed was led by the PDI, Chile's investigative police. From the beginning they focused on the insider angle. The level of operational knowledge required to execute this robbery without triggering a single alarm could not have come from external surveillance alone. Someone inside had talked. Cross-referencing the employment records of Esertval with known criminal associates took months. The trail was deliberately obscured. Some of the crew members had no prior criminal record. Others had used intermediaries to pass information so that no direct contact could be established between them and the insiders. The break came not from forensics or informants but from money. Large amounts of cash moving through a city leave traces even when the people spending it try to be careful. New vehicles purchased in cash. Properties bought through nominees. Businesses opened with no clear source of funding. The investigators began following the spending. By late 2020 the picture had come into focus. The crew had purchased over 100 vehicles and approximately 37 properties using the stolen money. They had spread the acquisitions across multiple names, multiple districts, multiple cities. But the pattern was consistent enough that the investigators could map the network. On December 1, 2020, 3 years and 2 months after the robbery, the PDI executed 20 simultaneous raids across Santiago and Valparaiso. 13 people were arrested in a single operation. Among them were 2 of the security guards who had been on duty the night of the robbery and had played a central role in facilitating the entry. The arrest of the security guards was the element that transformed the case from a remarkable robbery into something more disturbing. These were men who had been hired to protect the very money they helped steal. Men whose families had watched them be led away as victims on the night of September 18, only to discover years later that they had been perpetrators. The judicial process that followed was complicated. Of the 13 initially arrested, 12 were released without preventive detention by the initial court. The decision provoked public outrage. The Court of Appeals of Santiago overturned the ruling days later. But 6 of the 12 could not be recaptured. They had disappeared. The leader of the operation, identified in court documents as Luis Mosquera and known by the alias El Nova, was captured separately in December 2020 during a routine police check in central Santiago. He was carrying no identification. He was stopped because he was violating quarantine restrictions during the COVID pandemic. He was carrying a firearm. It was an almost absurdly ordinary end to an extraordinary story. Esertval no longer exists under that name. The company restructured after the robbery. New protocols were implemented across the entire cash transport sector in Chile. Minimum staffing requirements on holidays were increased. Multiple redundant alarm systems became mandatory. The industry spent years and millions of dollars trying to ensure that what happened on September 18, 2017 could never happen again. Of the $21 million stolen that night, investigators estimate that only a small fraction was ever recovered in the form of seized assets. The properties and vehicles were auctioned. The cash itself was never found. The prevailing theory among investigators is that the majority of the liquid funds were moved out of Chile within weeks of the robbery through informal financial networks. Chile's history with spectacular robberies became internationally known when Netflix released Baby Bandito, a series based on the 2014 airport heist. The 2017 Esertval robbery was the larger, more sophisticated crime. It happened in the shadow of a national celebration. It was executed by a crew of 16 people with military precision. And for 3 years it remained completely unsolved. You made it to the end of this story. That means you're exactly the kind of person this channel was built for. Subscribe to Southern Legends, share this video with someone who loves history, crime, and mystery. The next story is already being prepared. And trust me, you don't want to miss it. The story of the Esertval robbery tells you something important about how certain crimes are possible. Not because security systems fail, though they do. Not because criminals are smarter than investigators, though sometimes they are. But because institutions depend on the loyalty of the people inside them. And loyalty, under the right pressure, has a price. Somewhere in Chile tonight there is money from that robbery that has never been accounted for. Somewhere there are people who know exactly where it went. The case is technically closed. The sentences have been handed down. But the full truth of what happened on Chile's Independence Day in 2017 remains, like the money itself, only partially recovered. If you want more stories like this one, stories from South America that never made international headlines, subscribe to this channel. Every week we go deeper into the cases that were too complex, too local, or too inconvenient to reach the rest of the world. The next story is already waiting.